Welcome in to the World-Herald's NCAA tournament selection show special, I guess. The NCAA tournament is here. College baseball postseason's back, and we're going to have the College World Series here in Omaha in just a few short weeks. So we're excited, so excited that we thought we'd gather a couple of our college baseball experts together to talk about the 64-team field, Nebraska's draw, and potential path through a regional, maybe even further. We'll see. We've got Evan Bland, the Nebraska baseball beat writer, here to offer his insight, and Z Long, our digital director, who is a college baseball nut and has been following the sport closely all year, and he's going to offer some national perspectives, and I'm just here to direct traffic, I guess. Obviously, I've covered the College World Series over the last few seasons, and I'm as pumped as these guys are, too, to break it all down. So, plenty to get to, but I think we got to start with Nebraska. The Huskers won the Big Ten, secured that automatic bid a couple weeks ago, and everything looked pretty. And then all of a sudden, the brackets revealed, Evan, and whoa, the Huskers have to face Arkansas, or they're going to Arkansas in that regional, the number one overall seed, Arkansas Razorbacks, who won the SEC tournament for the first time ever, matched their program record with 22 regular season SEC wins. They've been ranked number one in the country for like 7 straight weeks. It's a daunting task to go to that regional. Oh, by the way, Nebraska has to face Northeastern, which is probably an underrated 3 seed at that in the first game. And if they get past Northeastern, then there's Arkansas. So I've laid it all out. I mean, it's no big deal, right, Evan? How are these Huskers going to handle it? What's your reaction to it? And just sort of what do you think that the approach is going to be for this team?
Yeah, I was surprised. I mean, I felt when the 8 top national seeds came out, that those were the teams Nebraska wasn't going to have to play in the opening regional round. I mean, they won 10 of their last 11 games. They won the series over Michigan to end the season. I felt like they had played their way out of the Arkansas regional 2 weeks ago. And you look at how they're ranked in the top 25, they're right around number 20 nationally by most polls. And so you'd think, okay, maybe they're going to play the back end of those 16 national seeds. I thought maybe Notre Dame would be a destination, maybe Oregon. But when it pops in right away that Nebraska is going to Arkansas, it was kind of a bizarre sort of moment at Haymarket Park. I was there. The team was out on the right field concourse. They had a little live stream going for the reaction on ESPN2, and it was just muted. There were a few kind of golf claps. Players just kind of looked at each other a little bit like, okay, here we go. And to their credit, I mean, they came in for some media availability after that. They said all the right things about, we don't care. We're just going to keep playing our game and all that. But you could tell they were not happy with this thing. And this is just kind of another slight, I think, as they see it, to a team that wasn't top 6, voted by its own conference coaches beforehand. And now they're getting kind of the short end of this particular draw, too. So, a bit of a surprise. Certainly I was surprised. I talked to the selection committee chairman, Jeff Altier, a little bit later in the day, and he didn't have a great explanation for why Nebraska specifically was sent there, other than to say that the Big Ten's league-only schedule really limited their evaluation of Nebraska. So you have to fade the RPI a little bit. I think Nebraska finished at 42 in that regard. And what you replace that with is more feedback from their regional advisory committees, which are these coaches of these other teams in the league that give feedback and provide that to the committee. And at the end of the day, Altier just said, look, somebody's got to play number 1. Somebody has to go to Arkansas and do it. Tons of storylines. Obviously, Will Bolton, his second year as Nebraska's coach. Dave Van Horn, the head coach at Arkansas, was Bolt's coach at Nebraska in the late 90s and early 2000s when this thing took off. So a lot of interesting storylines. I totally get why fans are upset by this draw, especially when you look around the Big Ten and you see Michigan and Maryland, looking at much more favorable, much more winnable regionals right off the bat. But hey, I mean, you look at the Big Ten history, Michigan's knocked out the number 1 overall seed just 2 years ago in UCLA. Maryland has knocked out UCLA as the number 1 overall seed too. So it's not unprecedented for a Big Ten team to go in and beat a number 1 overall. But at the same time, I don't think this is something that Nebraska was anticipating here in the opening round.
Yeah. I had the feeling that at some point today we were going to be discussing the Big Ten's decision to go conference only and the impact that it had on selection. Now, I was surprised. I don't know, surprised, but like the fact that the Big Ten got 3 teams in to me was notable because I was a little bit concerned that the league might get a slight there in terms of its number of bids, because when you play conference only and most of the rest of the country is mixing and matching, playing within their different leagues, it becomes tough to evaluate a certain conference, and especially the Big Ten, which rarely gets the benefit of the doubt in baseball circles, and has been fighting an uphill battle trying to prove itself from a reputation standpoint for the last 10 years, and has invested more money in the sport and has changed some narratives. Obviously, when you look at Indiana making the College World Series and Michigan making a run to the title game 2 years ago, like things have changed. We know that, but it still feels like they're fighting that battle. And then it's like you already had one hand cuff behind your back. Now you're going to put the other one? Like, that's what it felt like when they're like, oh, yeah, we're going conference only. So it's unfortunate that Nebraska is at the center of the discussion. And I think, how could it not relate back to that? As you said, Evan, it's became difficult for the committee to evaluate Nebraska's resume versus the rest of the field. And where do you put this team? I don't know. I guess we'll just send them to Arkansas, which is a bus trip away. And you can get some fans in there. It'll be a fun atmosphere, and it's the closest regional, right? So like from a location standpoint, and that matters. It has always mattered in college baseball, maybe more than it should. So it's disappointing, but man, I do go back to the decision to go conference only. I feel like that played a role here. And you said it too, Evan. So
yeah, well, what I found interesting in listening to Jeff Altier, again, the committee chair, he had like a half-hour webinar with media a little bit ago. Someone asked him about why Fairfield got in as an at-large, and a team that they compared them against, Jackson State, didn't. And Jackson State played a handful of non-conference games. They went 1-7 in their non-con. And what Altier said that I thought was interesting was part of what the committee did this year in determining who got in and how they navigated these teams with league-only schedules is, he said, as a committee, they were trying to discourage in the future teams putting together conference-only schedules. They felt like that would be detrimental for college baseball, that doesn't help, certainly with the evaluation process. And so that absolutely played out with the Big Ten, where Nebraska got the draw that it did. Michigan still made it. To its credit, it had an RPI of 89, which he said maybe is the highest RPI of any at-large qualifier ever in the modern format of the tournament. But I think you could, in a normal year, I think Iowa probably would have had a chance to get in. I think Indiana was another team that faded down the stretch, that if they had a non-conference resume to kind of bolster what they had done, then this could have been another 5-bid year for the Big Ten. And that's kind of what it's become in the last handful of years. And so when you cut off the front end in no non-conference games, you cut off the back end in no conference tournament, it's all about what's in the middle, just getting the wins. You have nothing to compare it to. And the result is this kind of weird, throw it against the wall and see what sticks sort of situation that we ended up with for the Big Ten.
I do want to talk a little bit about the challenge that Nebraska, we're here, Nebraska fans, as disappointed maybe as you are with the draw. The Huskers are here, and as you said, Evan, like they're saying the right things, and Will Bolt's going to get them motivated, and they've kind of had the chip on their shoulder all season, so they'll carry that with them down to Fayetteville. And I want to talk a little bit about that challenge, but you brought up the kind of the biggest storyline, the talking point of the week, I think, is going to be the reunion, so to speak, with Dave Van Horn and Will Bolt. And so I got a chance when I was covering the Nebraska baseball team for a few seasons back when Darren Erstad took over the program and he hired Will Bolden as assistant. Got a chance to kind of be around Will Bolt, gauge his personality a little bit, and being able to cover the College World Series, we've obviously had firsthand glimpses of Dave Van Horn. These two are the same person, man. Like, their mannerisms are the same. The way they carry themselves, the way they wear their hats, the way they talk. Like, it just seemed they feel like they're just one and the same. So to me, that's it. Obviously they're in different places in terms of building their program up and where they're at on the professional realm of coaching. And so like for me, there's a ton of intrigue in just seeing these two sort of go head to head and try to move their lineups and mix and match pitchers and just kind of manage their teams, knowing that they know everything about one another. I think is really fascinating. The mentor-mentee matchups are always fun to follow, but then again, it's like you sort of feel bad for them both because they have so much respect and admiration for one another that neither probably wants to go up against each other. If indeed they do get that opportunity, obviously Nebraska and Arkansas would have to win or lose at their first game. They don't play the first game against each other, but we assume they'll face off at some point in this regional. So what are you looking forward to in the Dave Van Horn, Will Bolt reunion, Evan?
Yeah, it will. I mean, you're absolutely right, John. Like these guys do sound and they even look similar. Like they just approach things similarly. I mean, that's something I'm going to write about obviously later this week, but I know that part of what Dave Van Horn does, like how he goes about building a program and putting together an offense and things like that. I mean, Will Bolt picked up on that, like how he recruits, how he puts together a team. That's all now because Will Bolt's the head coach at Nebraska. That's going to start filtering back into how Nebraska does things and how it tries to approach success and things like that. So it's, I think that's going to be part of the fun, is to kind of be refreshed on just where the major influence of Will Bolt or what it's all about. You know, I think that's going to be something fun to see. You know, what Dave Van Horn has made at Arkansas is just unbelievable in terms of the machine they have rolling there. But what I think is really interesting is how this Nebraska team might handle it, because, you know, everybody's going to say the right stuff and say that they don't care about the circumstances. But man, the fact is, not every team can get over some of the things, just some of the circumstances that might pile up. I mean, Nebraska goes 4-0 in a pod at Indiana late in the year. They win the league without the benefit of nearly as many home games as everybody else had. Like, it really feels genuine to me that they just move on. Like, you figure out what the game is. You don't worry about the other circumstances, and you go from there. And so to have this challenge to go to the number one seed and to feel slighted the way they have to feel based on their resume to this point, I'm going to be really fascinated to see if they end up matching up against each other, how that goes, because it does seem like Nebraska is more suited for that. And again, part of that goes back to the characteristics of the head coach, Will Bolt, and the characteristics of Arkansas's head coach, Dave Van Horn. And so to see those mentalities clash is going to make for some pretty compelling television, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Dave Van Horn's Arkansas teams, when you've seen them in person, they're loaded. Like, they've got so much pitching talent and some high-profile position players, but he's always kind of been a coach that has had sort of that gritty mentality that Will Bolt obviously exudes in his teams over the years. Like when I remember when I first started covering Nebraska, Will Bolt had a little whiteboard in the dugout where he was tracking. He was kind of the hitting coach, right? So he's tracking dirt ball reads and hustle plays. It's still there.
Still there.
Yeah.
So plays.
He like so much of the blueprint to success for those Nebraska teams back in the day. Yeah, they had Alex Gordon and Java, like they had some stars, but they worked so hard and they had sort of that, we're going to prove everyone wrong. We're going to go up against Texas in the Big 12 and hold our own sort of thing. So while Arkansas has so much talent, I think that they still have that sort of, it's kind of hard when you're the favorite and you're got that number one national seed attached to you to kind of play with a lot of grit. I think Arkansas has the capability to do that, but we'll see, because if they do in fact face Nebraska or even Northeastern, if Northeastern can spy Nebraska, like those two teams are going to be difficult outs. It's kind of a tough draw for Arkansas, honestly, as the number 1 overall seed to have to potentially play these two teams in a regional. So we'll see how it shakes out. Z, I want to get your insight because you are one who is often flipping the channels and checking out some of the most raucous atmospheres in the SEC and all these teams that are so loaded with talent. How difficult is it going to be for a team like Nebraska to take down Arkansas on the road in a regional setting over a weekend of action?
Well, John, I'll be honest with you. I was prepared to talk about Arkansas today, but I really did not think I would be talking about it in the context of Nebraska having to go there. It's just it's a bad shake, and the only explanation I'll give to the NCAA and try to be nice here is they went with regionality. I hope that's the excuse, because if it's anything other than regionality, I just don't buy that Nebraska is the 32nd best team in the country getting stuck in there with Arkansas. But at the same time, Will Bolton, the boys kind of like the chip on the shoulder mentality thing going on. Well, Merry Christmas, because you just got served that. But at the same time, in the words of the great illustrious philosopher Ric Flair, if you want to be the best, you have to beat the best. And I'm telling you, Arkansas is the best. This is a death machine of a baseball team. And the key superlative, I could sit here and tell you stats all day, but here's the key one as it relates to the postseason and NCAA baseball. Someone's going to have to beat them twice. And that has not happened this entire baseball season. And that is saying something, my friends, in the SEC. They ran through that SEC tournament clean this week, did not suffer a loss. They are absolutely loaded. They lost one of their starting pitchers, Peyton Payette. They have suffered some injuries. They've got another kid that got hurt, got an ankle rolled in this, and they might have him back this week. It might most likely be the Super Regional, and they have a transfer step in yesterday, and he hits a bomb. I mean, they are absolutely loaded. Their middle infield is one of the prettiest combinations you will ever see. Battles and Bob Moore, obviously the son of Kansas City Royals general manager Dayton Moore, those dudes are smooth. They make plays look really easy. And the key thing I said earlier before we got on the air with Arkansas is this: when they get in a little bit of trouble, they're just one of those teams you never worry about it because of the bats and the speed they have in the lineup, and they'll absolutely kill you. And Van Horn has got a pitching staff and a bullpen, emphasis on the bullpen, where the SEC Pitcher of the Year chills. You don't often say that, do you, friends? That the SEC Pitcher of the Year is in your bullpen with Kevin Kopps, who is a dandy. But that's where Arkansas hits you. They've got the front end arms. They've got kids in their bullpen that can throw 99, 100. They're a really tough out. Now, if you sit there and said, okay, what's a weakness? And I don't want to say that because I don't want Arkansas fans killing me. But Wickersham, Tennessee got to him a little bit, and he got into a little bit of trouble in the SEC tournament. Now, he's been nails otherwise, but that is one arm that, hey, you know what? You get a couple big base hits, you get on base with a bunt, and you hit a bomb. There you go. You can get a lead early on Arkansas. The key is going to be you're going to have to sustain the run when they do respond to you. They had a 3-game losing streak this year at the start of the season, and that's it. That's the only weakness you can have here. Here's the last one I'll close with Arkansas. They open the season, okay? And you know how it is. We open the season. It's hard to judge. It's hard to see where you're at. Here's their first 3 wins of the season, my friends. Texas Tech, Texas, TCU. And as John and Evan, all 3 of those are now national seeds.
So it's a piece of cake. No big deal. Nebraska going to Arkansas.
Yeah, man. Can of corn.
Arkansas is 12-2 in NCAA tournament games at home over the last 2 seasons, the last 2 NCAA tournaments. Like last year didn't happen, right? So 2018, 2019, Arkansas went 12-2, won regional and super regionals both of those seasons. The 2 losses came in game 2 of the supers. They played South Carolina in 2018 and Ole Miss in 2019. And what they do after they lost that game 2, kind of going back to what you said, Z, about having to beat Arkansas twice. Well, they beat Ole Miss 14-4 or something like that. And they beat South Carolina 14-1 in the decisive games of those super regionals. So you may get them once, but having to do it again on the road is going to be a really difficult challenge for whoever emerges from the opposite side of the bracket as Arkansas. So it's going to be tough. But as you said, Evan, I don't know if you want to expound on this a little bit more about sort of the house money. It's kind of I always hate to use the term house money, playing with house money as a team, because the players while they're excited and happy about what they've accomplished, like you don't enter the NCAA tournament just to say, oh, okay, who cares? We don't care if we win or lose. Like we just are glad to be here. Like nobody has that mentality. So Nebraska wants to win. But then again, I'm not going to pick Nebraska to win that regional. A lot of people aren't. So I don't know. It does seem like a team that is, if it were going to be put with its back against the wall, like this is the team that could respond in the right way.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think of the Nebraska team 2 years ago that went to the Oklahoma State Regional. I mean, that was kind of a top-heavy Nebraska team, didn't win the league, still found a way to win its first game, and was, a hanging offering in the ninth inning away from going up 2-0 in that particular regional. And this team is deeper than that. I think that's the big key is like a lot of Nebraska teams, when they've struggled in regional play, they've maybe had one, maybe two arms. And then after that, it was kind of like, well, you could just tell the depth of talent wasn't there relative to some of the better teams in the country, the teams that you see making the College World Series. And so I feel like this team has figured that out, and that's been evidenced by playing in pods. The Big Ten has had these 4-game weekends, which actually simulate regional play pretty well in terms of scouting for multiple opponents, kind of coming in and out again, needing to fill a bunch of innings with your arms. So Nebraska, they have a feel kind of for what they want to do. I wouldn't say that this is a team playing with house money, because this is a team that's going to lose a lot of talent after this year. Spencer Schwellenbach's going to get drafted. Cade Povich, their Friday guy, is probably gone to the draft as well. A bunch of fifth-year guys who've been parts of this team for a long time, like Luke Roscom and Joe Acker and Mojo Hagee, those guys are all moving on next year. And so not to say Nebraska can't start a run and get things going under Will Bolt, but for this team and what's made this team go, it's largely built on the seniors and guys that are probably going to be moving on after this. And so I think if there's another thing that does play to Nebraska's favor a little bit, it is that kind of veteran leadership, right? Like Arkansas, they have the kind of roster that's going to be guys that are going to get drafted after their third year in the program. And so Nebraska, in this case, is kind of like that NCAA, basketball team that has a bunch of, older guys on the team. Maybe they're not the top 2 or 3 most talented teams in the country, but they have that savvy. They play within themselves. Like it just doesn't feel to me like that's going to be a team that's going to let the moment get the best of it. And I think in baseball, especially college baseball, where if you don't make the mistakes, you tend to do well. I feel like that's going to play into their favor.
We spent a lot of time talking about Arkansas, rightfully so. That's the team that is hosting this regional, and it's been the best team in the country. And that's a big story. But the Huskers are going to open up against Northeastern, and Northeastern is pretty legit. I mean, if you look at some of the numbers that that Northeastern has produced this year, like third in the country in ERA, ninth in fielding percentage. They got the third best whip in the country, third in the nation in stolen bases. I mean, like the competition level is different, obviously, but I don't know, man. Like I look at there's a lot of good. One thing about this year's tournament, and we talked about it at the start of the year, is like with a smaller Major League Baseball draft in 2020 and more eligibility, sort of relaxing of those rules and giving players an extra year, there's more talent in the sport, and especially at some of the top programs. So that it feels like the field's really deep. But you start looking at some of these 3 seeds, and I'm like, man, Northeastern's resume, it feels like a team that shouldn't be a 3, but it is, and that's the team that Nebraska is going to have to open up against. What do you think about this first matchup? Are there any sort of connections or comparisons that kind of popped up in your mind when you saw the team on opposite Nebraska and on the bracket?
Well, the one thing about this team and this regional, actually, that's a theme, and I mentioned this on the Pick 6 podcast last week, but Nebraska going into last week was one of 5 teams in the country that was top 40 in ERA, top 40 in fielding percentage, and top 40 in scoring, runs per game. And 2 of those other 3 teams out of the 5 in the country are Arkansas and Northeastern. So it's a team that's really well balanced and a team that doesn't beat itself. And like Nebraska, it has when you have a fielding percentage that good, it sets such a high floor that you're not giving away those extra outs. You can't, if you're the opponent, you can't count on kind of those gift runs. So that is where it starts. And then, they're going to put the pressure on you. If they get a guy on, they're going to be aggressive on the base paths, as those stolen bases per game evidence that you mentioned. And ERA number 3 in the country, that's pretty good, right? At right under 3 runs allowed per game. So what I see is another team that's built very similarly to Nebraska. And, to some extent, you can, at least to a point, discount some of those numbers based on the teams that they're playing for, against Townsend and Hofstra and Delaware and teams like that. But at the same time, they're playing clean ball. They have an identity for who they are and what they want to do. And I think it's going to be a lot different of a challenge than Nebraska's had, because most of the Big Ten doesn't run much. Most of the Big Ten isn't a huge threat to score in a lot of versatile ways, and this team can. So I think Nebraska's run up to this point, when they played Indiana multiple times, when they played Michigan last weekend, is going to serve them well, because Northeastern may be a 3 seed and their schedule might not be among the best in the country, but it's a solid team that if they look past them to Arkansas, it's going to be a quick weekend out there.
And Evan, they got a dude. If you miss a fastball too, guess where it's going? The lovely grassy berm outside of Baum Walker Stadium. I mean, he's 3rd in the country in home runs right now. I hope I do not butcher his name, but Jared Dupierre, I think that's how you pronounce it. But 21 bombs, that's nothing to shake your head at.
Right. Absolutely.
One of the things that I just kind of glancing at Northeastern a little bit, they did play Wake Forest at the start of the year. Old Dominion took 1 of 3 against Old Dominion, so Wake didn't make the field, right? But Old Dominion obviously is really good. We know that. So have seen some top end talent before the Colonial, but they lost their second game of the conference tournament and had to go through the losers bracket to get into to an NCAA regional. And so to me, that always says something about a team that is able to kind of find a way to grind out a win. Like, their championship game was 11-10, like ridiculous, wild game, like epic kind of game. And they did it by beating UNC Wilmington, who has been kind of an annual NCAA tournament team for the past decade or so, like constantly seeing that squad in the field. So again, it's going to be a really tough opening game. It's one that I'm intrigued by, and obviously, if Nebraska can get past it, then it's got another challenge with Arkansas after that. So, good regional. What else is there on that regional? Anything else to say with Nebraska? Maybe I'll get your reaction, Evan. We mentioned the other 2 Big Ten teams. Maryland's going to the East Carolina regional. It's going to open up against Charlotte. Michigan, one of the last 4 teams into the field, opens against UConn, the champions of the Big East, and those 2 teams are in the Notre Dame's regional. You mentioned that, maybe those draws are a little bit easier than what Nebraska's got to deal with, even though Nebraska won the Big Ten. But your thoughts on the other 2 Big Ten teams, and just the fact that the Big Ten got 3 in a year when it's the pandemic sort of limited the exposure of the league.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think if you asked anyone associated with the program if they could swap with Michigan or Maryland, even though those 2 teams made it in as 3 seeds, I think Nebraska would do it. I mean, a 3 versus a 2 in most regionals is kind of negligible anyway. I mean, the quality of those teams is much closer than the difference, say, between a 1 and a 2. So, part of it's just the format of how they seed things and how things broke, and there were geographical considerations, considering Michigan's going to Notre Dame and things like that. Like that's all a factor too.
Like Maryland can hop on a bus and go down to East Carolina too. So all these Big Ten teams busing, yeah.
So that plays a factor too. I guess I felt like for the Big Ten at large, though, they were going to get 3 teams. Like that's what I thought it would be before the year. And that's how it turned out. Again, because there's some depth there, but a lot of times you don't see that depth in the Big Ten. You see that with what they do in February and early March. And this year, the league just didn't have a chance to do that. And so, like I said earlier, I felt like Indiana and Iowa were two teams in particular that would have racked up some wins against somebody outside of the conference that would have given them a little bit more cred in the eye of the committee. But that didn't happen. And so when all there is to look at is pure standings and wins and losses, there just wasn't enough there to bring those two out. Now, Michigan makes it with that RPI of 89. I think a lot of that, even though they'll say that it's a this year only thing, I think a lot of that has to come from that College World Series run 2 years ago, where you build up some equity from that. Because
and honestly, though, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, because and if you're evaluating the Big Ten, I mean, it's been a 4 or 5 bid league. The last 3 NCAA tournaments, it's got 4 or 5 bids.
Right.
So while it is a new year and everything changes, I get that. But to hold the Big Ten to that same bar doesn't seem unreasonable to say, oh, well, you know what? It's probably a 4 or 5 bid league. That's what it's been. That's what the track record says. It's not going to dramatically get different just because we had a pandemic. And Michigan proved itself to the last time everyone competed by going to the final game of the College World Series. So I'm guessing that's where, like you said, like why the league got some credibility, and perhaps it should be grateful to the fact that Michigan held its own in regular season play, because had it fallen down the standings a little bit, maybe it doesn't get that nod.
And for what it's worth, I'll just mention this too quick. That Michigan team that went 2 years ago, they needed to win multiple games in the Big Ten tournament just to qualify. Yeah. And if you go back and you look at their regular season, their Big Ten regular season, it was very pedestrian. I mean, they were top 3rd in the league, but it wasn't the kind of thing that said, yes, that's a regional team. It was built on what they did in the Big Ten tournament that got them over the hump, but then what they did in the non-conference portion of the year too. And so I just think that's a perfect example of how a normal schedule allows you so many different ways and opportunities to prove yourself. And as we've said, the league just limited itself in so many ways by going conference only this year, when almost every other conference in the country decided to figure it out. And guess what? Everybody else in the country was fine, and it did work out. And so, yeah, I mean, Will Bolt's privately not happy about it. Eric Bakich, the Michigan coach, came out publicly and said he would have understood if they were left out, because the Big Ten did this to themselves this year. And it's, the fact that they got 3 in probably is actually a positive testament to where baseball in this league has come in the last decade.
I remember when Nebraska first joined the league, the year before that, I think the highest rated team in the RPI. Now, this doesn't really make sense this year because the RPI was all wonky, but it was like Michigan at 75, or Michigan State at 75. Like the highest rated team in the league the year before Nebraska joined. It's come a long way, and obviously the Big Ten hopes to keep growing. So Nebraska Northeastern, do we have a game time yet? Do we know?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock on Friday. One of the most intriguing. There's a lot of great matchups on Friday. Z, give me what's your favorite opening day matchup in a regional this weekend?
Oh man, there's some good ones down there. One of the regionals that you just mentioned, UConn, Michigan. Hello. That should be a dandy we'll find out a lot about those teams right off the bat in there. And then how about down in Lubbock? Look, intriguing 2-3, UCLA and North Carolina. 2 prestigious names that probably wanted to have a little better seasons than they did. That is a heck of a matchup. I'll also look down there. That TCU regional is sneaky good. Oregon State, Dallas Baptist, who I know John respects quite a bit. That should be a fun one. And then, hey, how about a little regional warfare there? South Carolina, Virginia in the ODU regional, which is unfortunately at South Carolina. That could be fun. And then I hate to state the obvious and say this, but everyone else has circled Gonzaga and LSU, great for Paul Mainieri to get in, but that could be a fun one. How about the Zags?
I was going to say, you have to circle that one because the Zags had a chance to host. And
they might have they might have a little problem with the NCAA as well. Yeah, it's exactly right.
I don't know if there's any correlation here or it's always an easy narrative to jump onto, but like the teams that feel snubbed but are still in the field, And if they can play with that chip on the shoulder, I always like to back and ride with those teams. Like Nebraska's going to be feel like it has something to prove, and Gonzaga. But I don't know if that actually matters once they actually start playing baseball. You can kind of throw out some of those narratives because what matters is who executes on the field. But it is fun to talk about, and it makes me think that, like, yeah, you know, if they've got something to put on the locker room wall to motivate them as they go through their prep this week, that can't be a bad thing. So I like that Gonzaga match. I like to see what Gonzaga can do this week as a team that maybe got a little bit of a snub.
And watch that just for curiosity purposes down in the Austin Regional, Fairfield, Arizona State. Watch that one. I want to see how Fairfield responds after getting in. I know they're facing a lot of criticism for getting in, and Arizona State, they weren't real great down the stretch there. So I think there'll be a few people watching that matchup to see how Fairfield plays at the big stage after having one heck of an almost perfectly clean season.
As fun as these regionals are, like, and they are a lot of fun. I don't know if there's really anything like the first weekend of the NCAA tournament in college baseball. I know that the coaches want to change the rules, or a lot of the coaches want to change the rule or the structure and make it more like traditional baseball, where you have series and you don't have to do weird and wild pitching moves and bring back guys on short rest and all that stuff. And I get that from a player safety standpoint. It certainly makes sense. But it's wild. It makes no sense sometimes. Some of these regionals, the way they play out, and you have some pretty crazy upsets. All of a sudden, all you need is one really elite pitching performance on day one to put you on the winner's bracket, and then you never know what can happen. You can be rolling all the way to a super. So these are fun, and I love following them. And super regional matchups, we always enjoy those. But we're in Omaha, right? Like, we want to know who's going to make it to Omaha, and we want to know who's going to take the field at TD Ameritrade Park. So I guess my question to you guys is, who do you want to see? What teams are you intrigued by? What squads are you maybe just interested if indeed they can get to Omaha? We're going to cover this tournament, obviously. Who do you want to see?
Go ahead, Z.
Well, I mean, I think the big one is you're looking at what I've watched a lot this year, and it's the same thing. It looks like the NCAA tournament committee gave the most respect to, which was the SEC and the Big 12. There are some really nice, great baseball teams in there, and some of them have been put in regionals where they're not necessarily the top seed, but they are a problem down the line. And I'll tell you the most intriguing one, and albeit for me to disrespect Texas, but man, I look at the Florida Gators and how they played in the SEC tournament. Sitting there, they got to go through Miami at home, and you know that. Inject that straight into my veins, right? They love each other so much. But should they get out of that, give me that Florida-Texas matchup at Dish Falk Field for a trip to Omaha. I guarantee you, whatever team comes out of that, look out once they get here. But, you know, Florida, Kevin O'Sullivan, everyone's shocked, right? They, you know, a little shocked. I saw them as low as 15 in terms of that national seed. They can be a problem. They are playing really, really well right now, and that's a team you can go through there. And then another one I kind of look at down there, keep an eye on because they just played well down the stretch, is Oklahoma State. That's a fun baseball team with some dudes that can swing it, as Nebraska, Evan, and us know very well from 2 years ago. We won't bring that up though, right? So that's a very fascinating team to watch if they get here. They're a heck of a lot of fun, and it won't happen because I'm not going to pick it to happen. But in terms of over the weekend, just the team that enjoyed watching was Louisiana Tech out of Conference USA. Those dudes are throwbacks to like the 80s. They're rocking the flow. They got the mullets, and man, they hit the long ball. And guess what? Not going to sell into this high level, but they own a win over Arkansas this year. They took one of two from Arkansas, which is saying something when you're considering Arkansas. So very fun team that won't get here, but I would enjoy seeing what they would do on a bigger stage.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if, like, the Conference USA, if that kind of, like, 4 bids, right? I mean,
and those are 4 ranked teams coming into this past weekend. Ranked teams, really good teams.
Will one of them break through? I mean, will we see sort of, the College World Series is always dominated by the powerhouses, but obviously, inevitably, there's 1 or 2 sort of surprise teams, or teams that maybe weren't projected to be here even at this point. I mean, just got done talking about Michigan. No one picked Michigan to make the College World Series 2 years ago, even after it made the NCAA tournament field. It had to go to Corvallis and then matched up against number 1 overall seed UCLA in a super regional. It was like, no way, Michigan's not. But they're here. So that adds some intriguing elements to it. And I feel like there's been a lot of programs that, especially in the South, that kind of coastal Carolina-like, where they've been so close to having a breakthrough moment, and they've got the talent, like everyth's in place. They just haven't had it yet. And like whether that's Louisiana Tech or it's East Carolina, I'm like, there's so many teams that like have been really good for a long stretch of time that just haven't found a way to get over the hump. And maybe that's what happens this year.
And Cliff Godwin in East Carolina, man, they've been knocking on the door. They've been close so many times, a couple super regional appearances. Now this year, that's going to require them to go through Vandy, which is not fun. But it's funny you mentioned that, John. Look at the Conference USA draws. With the exception of Louisiana Tech, which would obviously have to go through the winner of the Arkansas Regional. That's a tough draw, but look at the rest of them there. Old Dominion hosting at South Carolina. Got a couple tough teams in there. Southern Miss, they'd have to go through Ole Miss, which you know darn well that can happen depending on what day you catch the Rebels on. And then Arizona matched up opposite of them, not out of the realm of thinking. And then Charlotte, I know they didn't have a good weekend in their Conference USA tournament, but they were one of the most heralded teams out of that group. Look, they're sitting down there in that East Carolina bracket. Could they advance out and get a shot at Vanderbilt? So it is intriguing. Those teams are just kind of fun in a year where I know we got kind of depraved in the Big Ten of non-conference. Well, these cats didn't, and they performed a lot like a power conference, and they got that respect in the bracket today.
Yeah, I'm as much as I want to see the 1-2 punch of Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter in Omaha, I'm like, oh man, how cool would it be to have a team like Charlotte, which for a stretch there looked good enough to be a regional host, or a team like East Carolina, as you said, Z, that has been like inches away. It feels like they've been a top 8 or top 16 national seed the last 2 seasons. Maybe what I think I thought I heard. Maybe it was Kyle Peterson on the broadcast that one of the analysts said that East Carolina is the best program to never get to Omaha, and I'd have to be hard pressed to argue with that. I think that it's inevitable; it'll happen at some point, but it's going to be tough this year with Vandy lurking as a potential super regional matchup. Evan, any team that you've got your eye on? I mean, I know you've been Big Ten focused, obviously covering Nebraska, but what teams are you excited to see perform this week and next, and maybe even make it to Omaha?
Yeah, well, I think Fairfield is an interesting case as a team that went 37-3. They were a group that the committee wasn't necessarily sure should make it based on kind of the traditional metrics, but when you look at 37-3, that's 37-3. And so in that regional with Texas, Arizona State, and Southern, I'll just be curious to see if they can hang. Like, can they show that they belong? What can they do? And the same thing again with all those other league only teams. Like, this is their first chance to play non-conference. So like, how does that turn out for those guys? And maybe how does that affect how we view league teams that play league only schedules? And hopefully it's not going to be an issue moving forward, but it's just a fascinating, I think, kind of thought exercise to see how that plays out. But beyond that, just bigger picture, I'm fascinated by some of these traditional powerhouses that are in, but they're not favorites. So, what does a team like Miami do in that Florida regional? What does a team like Florida State do? I think they still have that, by far, that record for the most regionals in a row qualified for. In that Ole Miss regional for the Seminoles, what does that look like? LSU in that Oregon regional, like, occasionally you just kind of see these tradition-rich programs with blue chip type recruits rise up in these big moments. And so while their, bigger body of work doesn't necessarily suggest that they would make it to Omaha, sometimes that pedigree, that history just kind of finds a way that to impact some of these regionals and to have teams make a run. So I'm going to be watching some of those teams too. Just some of your recent powerhouses who are a little bit down, but still made it in. Sometimes their stories of redemption are just as thrilling to follow as teams that have never made it before. So I think that's another kind of fascinating thing to watch in this tournament with so many upstarts and so many teams that could break through and make new ground. What does some of these older, more established programs do now that they're in and it's all on equal footing again?
And the other,
43 straight regional for Florida State, by the way.
That's unreal. And that's the bring your big stick to the yard regional, my friends. Ole Miss, Southern Miss, Florida State and SEMO. Oh boy. Yeah, those are going to be fun. And another thing I think is fascinating too, Evan, is how does Notre Dame respond? You and I were talking before we started. They threw up the eight boxes on during a selection show and for the 8 national seeds. And I looked up and I said, well, where's Notre Dame at? There was a lot. They won
the ACC. Yeah, going away, right?
One lost series. They lost one series the entire year in the ACC. Now I looked up. I kind of went, holy cow, And then you dump UConn and Michigan in there, which can both be a handful depending on how they're playing at the given time. But then you look at the bracket opposite of them, guys. Mississippi State, when they're on, yes, fantastic baseball team. But they have found times they have struggled. And let's be honest, look at the rest of their regional. I know Campbell's got some a little bit of momentum behind them, but Sanford and VCU, watch Notre Dame right there. That's a sneaky team, and they're all green uniforms that you could very well see in Omaha if they take the right attitude over what happened with their draw. And I always love that 7-10 matchup because you never know who's coming out of those two hubs.
Yeah, and Mississippi State, what were they outscored Z at the SEC tournament, like 25-3 in 2 losses? That, as you say, the hot and cold. What version of Mississippi State are you going to get? But I certainly wouldn't want to take my chances in Starkville. So
right, and that's the tough part for Notre Dame. The difference between, you think 7 and 10 is not a huge difference. Well, if that 7 means you got to go to Stark Vegas at Duty Noble Field, yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem with a capital P. So that's the only thing I really worry about there. But like I said, Notre Dame's got to feel a little bit disrespected when they saw some of the love that some of their other ACC teams got in the draw.
I just wanted to note real quick, because this was a little bit fascinating to me, and I didn't follow the story until I saw the team name pop up on the screen. Jacksonville made the NCAA tournament with a 16-32 record. They were 3-15 in conference play during the regular season, yet they just won their conference tournament. So for the anything can happen speeches that coaches give, but for those coaches that give those speeches once conference tournament play begins, like they just got Exhibit A to reference in Jacksonville, which basically looked like it was done 3-15 in conference play, and then wins the league, and now it's in the NCAA tournament. So
the other one too, their friends to mention, we didn't mention the other team that's in Nebraska's regional, New Jersey Institute of Technology. They won their trip to Omaha in a parking lot. They got a rain delay that could not be overcome, and they were declared winners of their conference. Stony Brook, which everyone in Omaha knows who that is, they couldn't play the game. So you go and look on Twitter, look at the video of them jumping up and down. They didn't dogpile on the asphalt, thank God, but it has to be one of the more unique ways in NCAA history that a team gets into the tournament in the parking lot outside the locker room.
Only in baseball, man. Like, I feel like baseball has just the oddest scenes, especially in college baseball, these wild scenes and storylines. So, congrats to NJIT. Congrats to Jacksonville. Now you get Arkansas. And Jacksonville, you get to deal with an Old Dominion squad that leads the country in home runs. No big deal. Shall we? I guess I'll share my picks. I'm tasked with writing the World-Herald's Omaha 8, so we'll finish it out. You guys can yell at me and argue as much as you want. I wrote down here the teams that I'm going to select, my predictions for who's going to make it to Omaha. I'll give you the 8 here, and then we can go back and forth. Although my 8th team, I haven't decided, but here we go. I got Arkansas, Stanford, at Oklahoma State, Vanderbilt, Dallas Baptist as a 3 seed, surprising. Got to have a Cinderella story in there somewhere. Oregon, Mississippi State, and Z, you referenced the potential Texas-Florida matchup in the Supers. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure if I want to just go a little bit contrarian and pick Miami, which already took a series from Florida at the start of the year, has some great young pitchers. They're not going to be intimidated going into that regional against Florida. So I don't know who that 8 team is. We'll say Miami right now, but I'm writing in pencil. All right, what do you guys got? What do you want to say? Who's got to yell at me?
No, I mean,
what disputes do you have?
I haven't gotten far enough to pick an 8, so I can't take a ton of issue. The 2 regionals that I think are really interesting is the Oregon and Tennessee one, because Tennessee's been red hot. Their coach, Tony Vitello, I don't think is going to be there next year. I think he's going to be taking more money at a higher level sort of program. So to see what he can do is interesting. You can make the argument that Duke could come out of that thing as hot as they've been. Oregon, their coach, Mark Wasikowski, was at Purdue 3 years ago. So that would be a pretty cool story to see what they could do too.
Yeah, Oregon hasn't made this College World Series since 1954. So that would be different. By the way, you mentioned Tennessee. It's got to open up against Wright State. We don't have to go too into depth about that matchup, but Z knows Wright State's been a perennial NCAA tournament team. Good program. It's probably the most difficult 1-4 matchup we can argue obviously, but to me it feels
go look at their record if you want. No one got a hold of them real hardcore this year. That is a tough baseball team.
And for the number 3 overall seed, Tennessee Vols, that's who you open with. And then, oh, by the way, you may have to face one of the hottest teams in the country in Duke, even though Tennessee's rolling and playing good ball. But that's a tough regional, as you said. What else you guys, Evan?
There's just, I feel like, kind of like I said, when you get past the top, 8 to 10 national seeds, I feel like the competition level really evens out. There's just so many different ways that you could go with different things. Southern Miss is interesting to me as a team that could catch some people on the wrong day. I got to see UConn 2 years ago in that Notre Dame regional. I got to see them play Nebraska. That was a good, talented UConn team. And so for them to, I think they could hang in that regional with Notre Dame and Michigan. And, depending on who comes out of that Mississippi State side, that's a team that I think could be potentially a dark horse, as someone that nobody's talking about too. Obviously there's a lot of chalk. Florida is going to do what it does. I guess one other kind of dark horse I'd throw out is Arizona State, as a team that's been hit by a lot of injuries this year, has found a way to persevere. So they head down to Texas, and you just never know. I mean, that's a team that has stacked recruiting classes on top of each other. They have a ton of talent out there, and sometimes you just don't know who can emerge if given an opportunity because of all these injuries. So that's somebody else I'll be curious to see how they do.
What about you, Z?
All right.
Are you gonna yell?
I'm not going to yell at you, man.
Okay.
I mean, I think you made some good, and we're on the same page on a few things too. And I told you before this started, man, I hate going all chalky, but it's tough when you look at some of these matchups. I'll just go right down the seeding list. Yeah, I'm going to go with Arkansas. It's too hard not to pick them right now with the way they're playing. That 8-9 pod, very, very intriguing. I think I'll give the edge to Texas Tech there, because it will be in Lubbock if they both advance. In the middle of that lineup is a death machine for Texas Tech. They can hit the baseball, and that place is hard to play in. Oklahoma State, John, you and I are on the same cowboy train, right? We're riding that horse to Omaha. I like how they're playing right now, and I know there's a lot of tough teams in that pod, but man, they have really strengthened it up down the stretch. Vandy, I'm not going to pick against Vanderbilt at this point, especially with the competition around them. Indiana State, sneaky good team out of the Missouri Valley inside that pod as well. But man, Tim Corbin and Vandy at home, and the Vandy Whistler, very tough atmosphere to overcome for things beyond the Whistler. Up top, Florida. I really like the way they're playing, and I know they got to get through Miami and Texas on that route. But man, that's a team and a coaching staff that just knows how to win. So I'll put the Gators in up there. The intriguing pod that we mentioned earlier, I think it just comes down to the fact that Mississippi State can stay at home if they want to for the regional and super regional. So I'll put them in Omaha as well. And then down there where you picked one of your dark horses, that is, I think, the easiest pod to pick a dark horse out of, because there's several of them that could come out of there. Dallas Baptist, I mentioned the Missouri Valley. Them and Indiana State were big boys. Don't be surprised if either of them cause a lot of damage in their respective regionals. But I'm going to go with the team that I watched play a really heck of a game in the Conference USA Championship, Old Dominion. I still got the Monarchs in Omaha. That's my dark horse, and I don't even know if it's polite to call them a dark horse because they're ranked and they're hosting a regional, technically speaking. And then down low, I am putting Tennessee. I am buying hard on Tennessee. I know that is a brutal home regional that they got served up by the NCAA, and there's some good teams up top of them with Oregon. I'm just not sure on the Pac-12 because I haven't seen them a lot. Tennessee, I'll give them the edge for this, y'all. Their home stadium. That place is a viper pit if you've watched it this year. And I think they'll be stacking humans on top of humans in Knoxville week to watch those games. So I'll put Tennessee and Omaha as well.
Perfect. See, appreciate the breakdown, Evan. Thanks for your insight on the Huskers. Going to have a ton of coverage leading up to the College World Series, and obviously with Nebraska in the field. It's disappointing, obviously, 2 years ago in the 2019 NCAA tournament, we had 3 local teams make it. UNO won the Summit. Creighton made a regional win in the Big East regular season and conference tournament championship. Nebraska was obviously in the field. And that was a lot of fun. So much like to spend Friday following the results to see what all these teams from the area were doing, and Saturday as well. We don't get that this year. Just one local team to follow. UNO got to host the Summit League tournament in Omaha, but wasn't able to come up with the victory or the conference title, the auto bid. And then Creighton finished second in the Big East to UConn in the regular season. And just the bats went quiet at the wrong time for the Jays. Went to the Big East tournament and lost 2 games on a Saturday to Xavier and UConn. And as you mentioned, the UConn and Evan, you said you saw those guys in person a few years back. I mean, they're one of the more underrated programs in the country, I think, just because they are stuck up in the corner in the Northeast, and they don't get a lot of opportunities to prove themselves when they are rolling. Like, they play a tough schedule in the non-conference, the Huskies do, but it's like that's before they kind of get right, and everyone kind of as they're at their best in May. And so we'll see what they can do in this NCAA. I think it's their 4th NCAA bid in the last 5 tournaments. So it's a good program, and to be a 2 seed, obviously you're doing something right. So we'll see what UConn can do. But yeah, I appreciate you guys sharing your insight, and thank everybody for watching and listening. Again, follow all our coverage from now up until the College World Series, and through that event, we are glad it's back, and we can't wait to write and cover the storylines as they happen. So for Evan, for Z, I'm Jon Nyatawa with the World-Herald. Thanks for watching.